Good evening, and welcome to A Fright at Midnight. Tonight's tale is titled The Ghoul. A number of years ago, it was well known in literary circles that I had a great interest in true stories of the bizarre. As such, I was the recipient of a large number of tales and stories of the weird and wonderful. The majority of tales, it must be said, were largely imaginative hokum, well written but far from the truth. There were, however, a handful that stood out. One such story was from a police constable who, at his request, will remain nameless, who wrote me one of the strangest tales I've ever heard. It was a letter that I was sent on a cold, wet October morning almost 40 years ago, a letter I shall share with you now. I had only been a police officer for 2 years when I was stationed to a few villages in Somerset. I received a message from one of the more rural communities involving an alleged grave robbery. I'd heard stories of such crimes over the years, the targeting of jewellery of the deceased, but had yet to investigate such a case. I collected my belongings and arrived at the church mid-morning. There was nothing that stood out, a rather normal, small 16th century stone church with attached graveyard, those of which are commonplace in the West Country. I met with a sexton, a mute man, or certainly a man who did not engage in any conversation, who took me to the grave. The coffin had been crudely dug out and splintered in places, as if struck with a hatchet. The body, which according to the gravestone was a 50-year-old female who had died only a few months earlier, was in an expected level of decay. She'd been buried in her wedding dress, with a veil covering her face, although the dark, sunken, skeletal shape could be made out below it. I lifted the veil slightly to reveal a rather splendid silver necklace resting just above her breast. This I found confusing. The necklace seemed to be of significant value and had been left by the perpetrator. My attention was caught by the sexton, who was waving and pointing at something in the coffin. I moved down and saw him lift the hand of the woman. He pointed at her fingers. I examined them closely. The fingers on both hands were completely devoid of flesh, right down to the palm. The bone was strikingly white and clean, with every piece of skin, muscle and cartilage completely removed with surgical precision. How and why this was done was beyond me. I asked the sexton to assist me in transferring the coffin and body into one of the side rooms of the church to allow me to examine it further. I had a basic understanding of anatomy, and an examination of the body showed the corpse of a 50-year-old female in an expected state of decay. Other than 2 or 3 unaccounted circular marks on the side of her body, there were no known other irregularities, other than the fingers that had been so carefully Frenched of their flesh. I would arrange for a pathologist for a proper examination, but this would take 2 or 3 days owing to the location, and with night already approaching, I made the decision to keep watch over the graveyard. The sexton kindly set me up on a small table by the west window and left me some bread, cheese and wine to get me through the night. Most importantly, and at my request, he left me an old revolver and 6 bullets that are often reserved for the protection of churches. I made sure that my light was suitably dimmed so as not to disturb any intruder, which was made easier by the light of the full moon. It was the early hours when I was awoken by the sound of a muffled thud, low and deep, resonating through the ground after each considered strike. Only moments had passed before I saw the first cloud of dust explode from the earth only meters from me. As the bangs got louder, the thick wooden coffin started emerging from the ground, each strike moving it an inch further until almost half of it was revealed. The sound then stopped. I watched as a single black-clawed hand emerged from the hole beneath the coffin, then a second, and the creature pulled itself out. It was momentarily obscured by the coffin until it leaped into clear view. It was here that I got my first sight of the grotesque creation. It perched itself at the bottom of the coffin, its head twitching nervously, scanning for any threat. I estimated it no more than 4 feet high, although difficult as it squatted in an unnatural position. Its skin was like that of an eel's, black but with a glistening mucus which covered its whole body. Large drops of it escaped to the ground where the weight of mud and soil was too much. I hypothesized that this slime was how it must have moved underground. The chest was unusually large, certainly compared to the waist, which, like the arms and legs, were almost skeletal. How it managed to have the strength to dislodge a buried coffin was beyond my comprehension. It was then that it turned its face towards me. I retched, silencing myself with my fist. I had witnessed nothing in sketch or text which could quite describe what I witnessed. My words now are insignificant to the beauty of its deformity. The head was skull-shaped, defined and angular, with bony ridges appearing seemingly at random. It was devoid of any hair, with 2 pointed bat-like ears protruding from the skull. But all of these features were insignificant compared to the mouth. Oh God, the mouth. Rather than elongated, the mouth was perfectly circular, like that of a sea lamprey, filled with row upon row of pointed teeth. Deep inside the mouth, of the little I could see, in between the brown jagged teeth, it was mottled pink, that was offset against the blackness of the skin. The creature with a single strike splintered the top of the coffin. It leant its head in, which jutted in a motion of smelling, although it was seemingly without a nose, or not one I could see. It lifted the arm of the deceased out of the coffin, and holding the grey-purple limb by the wrist. It was impossible to tell from here the age of the body, but the fact that the flesh was still intact made me believe that the body could not have been lain more than a few weeks. It was then that my earlier question was answered. The creature brought its head forward and took the first finger of the corpse deep into that wretched disc-like mouth. A moment later, it pulled it out devoid of all flesh and leaving nothing but a perfectly cleaned bone. I could take no more. I removed my revolver, pushed open the window and fired a shot at the creature, although, in my panicked state, I struck the coffin instead, sending a splinter of wood and dust into the air. Its attention now firmly on me, and within an instant it started galloping towards me on all fours, much like that of an angered ape. I fired a second shot, this time more accurate, which careered into its shoulder, violently knocking it back into a gravestone, the impact almost knocking the stone over. The creature immediately jumped back up, but I could see the open wound on its shoulder. It lunged at me again, but seeing the gun, scowled and disappeared into the woods. That was the last I saw of it. For the rest of my career and beyond, I searched for it, but to no avail. The creature eluded me. Perhaps it had become wise to the dangers of man. I tried to reassure myself that the shot may have proved fatal, but I never truly believed this. That is my tale, witnessed by me, a creature not of woman born, who feeds on the flesh of the dead. God protect us all. You have been listening to a Fright at Midnight, and that story was titled The Ghoul. Good night.